Welcome to another episode of Underdog Leadership Podcast, Season 3. And if you've been following along, if you're falling into episode 12 here, I invite you to go back and listen to some of the other episodes so you can catch the flow that's going on here. We are in a groove. We have things happening here on Season 3. And in a minute, you're going to meet a dear friend, a former client, a colleague, a trusted advisor. She is so many things to me in my life. Her name is Delphine Haslé, and she is the executive director of Perley Health here in Ottawa, Canada. Welcome, Delphine.
Oh, thank you, Jenny.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here. Delphine is one of our amazing women authors in the collaborative book that, as you know, is launching in fall of 2023. And today we are going to have a conversation with Delphine about her story. We're going to follow sort of the similar format of a series of questions that we've been asking each of the women. So if you go back through the other episodes, you'll hear their responses and their feedback and their ideas. And I have to say, Delphine, one of the things that's been most incredible about this is their honesty and their vulnerability about answering some of these apparently I ask uncomfortable questions, Delphine. Is that a thing?
Yes, it is. You're known for it, so we expect it.
That's right. So if you want to know more about Delphine, her bio and all of her amazing accomplishments are in the show notes. So please go ahead there. But Delphine, before we dive into our questions, anything you want to tell our listeners about you or how you want to set the stage for this conversation that we're going to have?
Oh, that's me. I'm Delphine. And I think what was interesting, what I want to say is I've known you for many, many years now. We're not going to count. And I know you always wanted to write a book. That was always what you wanted to do. And we talked about it many, many times. And then you came to this concept and you're like, well, I'm going to do it. And I think you sent me the invitation. And it was a no-brainer. I needed to do this with you. And I said, yes, right away. And then it was like, what did I say yes to?
Yes.
But I want to say thank you to you because it was great for me, but I'm really excited about what it's going to give back to many other people, either starting or supporting new women in their leadership journey and all those things. So I'm really excited about it, but thank you for inviting me to be part of it.
Oh, and thank you for saying yes and being in there at the beginning. That's in fund development, which is our world that we came from. Those first supporters mean so much to us, don't they? Those first people that put their hand up and say, yes, that's a great idea, right? As you're exploring it. So with that, let's dive into the first question. And I purposely picked this question because I know my experience was the question is, what did you think your story was about, Delphine? And what did it actually end up being about?
So I think for me, I knew the story was going to be about me being promoted from a supportive role to the executive director, from your number 2 to number 1. And that's what my story is about at the end of the day. So that stays the same. What I did not expect, it was in some ways a healing power that came with working on the story. And the reason being, it's pretty new. I feel I'm still in the transition, maybe, it's been 4 years. And, but it's been 4 COVID years. I work in long-term care. This week is going to be finally, we won't wear masks and all the restriction will be lifted, but it's just today. Yeah. And that makes those COVID years were long years and there was not much time for reflection. It was a lot of action and moving forward. And so that's really what the change is, maybe. And maybe you will feel it when you read it too, you know.
Yeah. Megan Rabine in her research uses the phrase liminal space. And I went back and asked her what it meant. And she described it as, you know, when you're standing between the dining room and the living room, and there's an archway in between. And these liminal spaces are the space in between. And so what you're describing to me is that transition isn't like click, you're in the living room, you move to the dining room, right? You're number two, you become number one. You begin to embody the role. And even I think what I'm hearing you say is 4 years later, you know, there's many parts that you've mastered, I'm sure. But it is a process. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, for sure it is a process, and I don't think there is a finish line. You know, maybe you become every day you're learning more something. I don't think you're ever an expert and you're like, that's it, I'm done, I know everything. That would be very sad if anyone thinks they made it and that's it.
Yeah.
So I'm learning. So the transition is different, maybe, you know, but for sure, I think we're always on a journey.
Yeah. That's a theme in my world. And I love that you brought it up, this idea that, you know, learning never ends. But what I will say, and from this book, I can speak to it, beware and be mindful of the people you surround yourself with,
Oh,
right? Because they can lift you up, but they can also bring you down, wouldn't you say?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Having coach and mentors and people around you is, well, I believe it was key in my success, right? So, and that was a very important part. But having the right people around you that provide you that safe space where you can grow and where you can, and you get energy from people
Yeah.
and you can flip it. It can flip everything, right? It could be like you have to, you can gain so much, but it can sink you. And also it's really important to be mindful of your own energy, right?
Yeah.
Because there are times where you can be the anchor, and that's not a good thing. We all have days where we are, you know. I'm not saying that you have to be happy, get going every day. That's not possible. We have to be mindful of mental
Yeah.
health and everything. But overall, very important to know that positive brings positive.
Oh, yes. Yes. And you were a huge product of that. And it's very much part of your, I mean, I don't think you work in long-term care without that. Well, I just think in not-for-profit even. I mean, I work in both sectors, but that positivity of believing that in the product, if you're in corporate, or believing in the work you're doing, it gives you that sixth gear. I'm going to pause the concept conversation about energy, but I actually want to bring that back later. But first, the story. Can you start by telling us a high level synopsis of your story to the listeners?
So I will say I'm sharing my lived experience from this transition from the number two to the number one, starting with the recruitment for, and that was a whole adventure. But and then having a haha moment is like, okay, I made it. I know I was going to, so no surprise here, but it's nothing like I thought it was going to be. And needed to change my mindset to and find a way to be successful. And like you talked about it, we're in fundraising. There is, you know, it's a team sport, so I could not do it by myself. So to be successful, I really thought there was three important buckets for me. One was collaboration and trying to find the right team, and it's not just the people I'm working with; it's the leadership volunteers, working closely with the C-suite of the host organization. All that's so important. Could not have done it by myself. Then it was making sure that you find trusted coach and mentors to help you grow and just help you You cannot do it by yourself. I don't believe
Yep.
that. You have to know where your limits are, and you have to fill the gaps in some ways. And finally, it's all about making sure, deciding how you're going to show up. And it's a choice. It's, and so I don't, it's not a crisis identity because I knew who I was. It's how to change so you perceive how you are, that it's in
Right.
line. And that was a process.
Interesting. So we're
So,
going to hear
and I'm
more of.
giving tip and anecdote and trying, it's very authentic. I think it's funny, it's just the way it is.
Well, when I was reading it, I could hear your voice. I always think that's a good thing, right? And that beautiful French lilt that you have is very charming, and it really comes through in the story, Delphine. So, and you're going to read us a little excerpt. So, how about you grab your excerpt, and when you're ready, please do read.
Okay, so I'm shifting it's on my screen here. And okay, so for the first year of my tenure, I purchased a new blazer or power dress before each board meeting. When we move to virtual meetings, I will wear a blazer with a pair of jeans to feel like a badass warrior. Even with my new armor, I felt disoriented. My peers were telling me that I needed to wear specific brand names or shop in exclusive stores. But I detested those clothes on me and felt like a stranger if I wore them. On the flip side, I wear an outfit I loved to my very first seven-figure donation check presentation and ended up looking terrible in the photos. Tip of the day: do not wear animal print to a public speaking engagement. I decided then and there to hire a stylist to help me find the balance between personal expression and professional poise. So that's just one tip, and it goes on and on like that.
I just have this visual, right, of the leopard print and thinking it looks great. And in our roles as leaders, we're in all sorts of pictures, right? And I can imagine the disappointment, Delphine, when you saw the picture.
It was sad. I wish I could do a redo.
Well, especially that huge milestone in your career, right? Yeah. I used to think that stuff didn't matter, like clothes and I could get by. I was raised in a house where your smarts mattered, making sure you were intelligent, thoughtful, caring, absolutely. But, book smarts were really valued, not so much looks. And I'm actually very grateful for that because I watch these kids grow up in social media and the way they're obsessed with how they look. I just feel for them. I really do. And that's probably a whole other conversation. But, I think when you step into leadership, you are being watched. There's perceptions happening. We're going to talk about that in a second. And that idea of buying for me, it was a really nice belt to finish off the look. And I don't think anybody tells you that, Delphine, right? Like it's not like it's in the manual. I was in the manual looking for these are the things you need to do as a leader, right?
But it does make a difference. And it's perception, but it's also, and it's funny you're saying it's not in the manual. It might not be in the female leader manual, but it's very much in the male manual.
Ooh.
And because, and it's easier for them. So nice belts, the ties, like they have three things really to worry about, where we have so much more and more choices, which makes it more difficult. But what I wanted to say is, and you don't have to go fancy, like having a stylist is not fancy and it's not a long process. It was just working with someone for a couple of hours where she said few tips that I did not, because there was no manual, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think it's okay too, and without being all
Extravagant.
Instagram worthy. That's a
Yeah.
different conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it speaks to your, okay, the next question, but I also want to get back. Actually, I'm changing my mind. Tell us a little bit about this perception issue, right? The way when you got the job and the way you felt versus how you were perceived.
It's, yeah. So first, it was really interesting. I heard, so many times about the imposter syndrome, and I never felt it because I knew I was going to be a leader. I've never had any doubt about it. I know I deserve the job. I earned the job. Like, there was no question about it. I'm a leader. So, and then perception, how other people saw me then, and that was shocking. Might not be, but it really hurt. It did not hurt me. It was surprising. I don't know how else to it was, I did not expected it,
Right.
that perception, and it was from everywhere. It was from people who used to be my peer one day, the next day they see you differently. They all became, they thought I wanted them to be yes people, which is the worst thing that you can have around you as a leader. Then there was people who say, well, we are going into our largest campaign. She cannot do it. It's not
Mm-hmm.
doable anyway, but that's okay. Like, I'm like, what do you
Yeah.
mean that's okay? You play to win. There's no other way. If we
Yeah.
start it, it's because we want to finish it. And then there was, it's almost like they put you in front of a situation and they don't expect you to be successful. And I'm like, do you know me at all? Do you think I
Yeah.
do anything? Like I'm not successful at everything, but I will try my hardest. And if I'm going and putting my name forward, and I wanted our organization to be successful, so why, like those were so difficult, and those perception barrier was one of I knew it's something I needed to work very hard at removing one at a time.
Yeah.
And it was to be successful, a little bit to prove them wrong, and um, change that because I could not really put two and two together. Why can I be so sure of myself and no one could
Yeah.
see it?
Yeah.
So that was very difficult.
Yeah. I love that part. And thank you for sharing because I think many of our listeners will really resonate with that. That's like, I've got it. Like, why are they doubting me? And why are they starting with this sort of, I have a theory that that's a protection mode for many people, that they assume it's going to go terrible and they assume the person won't do it because then that way they're not disappointed. And many of us hide our emotions and don't share because when you protect yourself from disappointment, you also protect yourself from joy. And I think great leaders are able to bring people along on that journey. That's something you've done with your leadership. And, just an aside, because we're both fundraisers, the money is the byproduct, right? It's not the goal. To me, it's about bringing the people along in the vision of the organization, and the support and the trust shows itself in money. That's kind of been my journey as a fundraiser, which is why the bigger the concept, the bigger the vision, the better the case, the more successful the campaign will be. Because people don't just, I mean, I don't know about you, but people don't just give me money because,
No,
right?
too many great causes out there. We
That's
cannot just
right.
expect, you really have to inspire.
Yeah. So when fear and doubt get in the way of you expressing yourself, how did you move through it? Tell me about that.
Didn't. Yeah, so this one was my biggest fear was a white page, right? And I'm like, how am I going to share that where I'm starting? And that was so when all the collaborator we got together in our weekend in Toronto, we started, we were working with Michelle. She was great. And she just said, well, you're just going to tell your story and you're going to tell it to two other persons. So we were sharing and she just record it and you'll see, just say, and if you
Yeah.
speak 30 minutes, is that many words? And she was bang on. And so then I did not have a blank page actually, right? Because you're starting, you're there. And then I think the fear came about at like 3/4 of the story down, and I kept rereading the first paragraph again and again and changing it 20 million times, not making it better at this point at all, right? And being stuck.
Yeah.
And I could, if I was by myself, I would have been stuck forever.
Yeah.
But again, always surround you with trusted experts, um, coach, and people who wants to help you through. And that's where I went back to Michelle and I'm like, hey, this is where I am. Like, I need your feedback.
Yeah.
And she's beautiful as she gives feedback, very positive, but there was a lot of things we needed to change. Well, no, it's not true. It's just reorganizing and asking the difficult question, very much like you, where, and took those fears away.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it was interesting, right? It's like, first, what am I going to say? And then you share your story, and everyone is like, oh, that's something people needs to hear. And you're like, oh, okay, I can go and then starting to put it on paper, which is it's very different, right? Because you have to slow down, you have to think about it. Every word has some meaningful, and to me, it was really difficult. Like we all read so many books that are
Yep.
very for leadership this, leadership that, and they all, none of them sounds like me, obviously. And and that was a choice again. How do you choose to show up? Do I try to fake it because he will have been faking it and making very this or just use my own voice? And I decided to choose my own voice, and then you're like, oh, how people are going to respond to that? So that's a new
Yes.
fear. So my next fear is like how people are going to respond to our book.
Yeah. And just for our listeners, English is your second language. So here you are also writing in your second language. Your first language is French, right?
Yeah, I learned
Yeah.
English at 18.
You learned English at 18. Oh my
To
gosh.
have a course, yeah, before 18 years old, I could not have a conversation in English.
Yeah.
I could read
Wow.
it a lot of it, but yeah.
Amazing. Well, you did a great job, and I love the way you found your way to move through it. Was there a moment during the process of writing when something clicked for you or something kind of fell into place, Delphine?
I think what clicked for me is I was not aware of Megan's research, right? And how she has and the different buckets. And all of a sudden, my story fell into three of the buckets and I could name it,
Yes.
right? So she doesn't talk about imposter syndrome, she talks about the perception barriers.
Yeah.
Then the glass cliff, where definitely is like, oh, she's going to go into the largest campaign for our organization, but that's okay. She does, like,
When she fails, we'll hire someone else,
yeah.
right?
And then when I realized how Kalma was in crisis, COVID was a huge crisis in everything we were doing, and all those. So now all of a sudden, I can name what's happening to me, and it helped me.
Yeah.
And so when I was writing it, I'm like, oh, that is definitely something. If he helped me, is going to help many other people, right? And
Yeah.
I think it's great that our stories are each in different buckets and they follow like that, and that's how it all comes together. And I think it's that, to me, that was really the haha moment.
Yeah.
And
Completely.
you're not alone anymore, which is great. And no
No, and
one is alone, all of us, like, it's great that we are sharing our stories, because we're not doing it just to set or to, it's because, hey, if it happened to me, it probably happens to you, and it happens to another person. So we are in together, and we can all grow together, that learning forever piece.
Yeah. I definitely had that feeling through everybody's stories. And if you're listening and you're on the fence about buying the book, if anything, and I imagine there's more than one thing that Delphine has spoken about that resonates with you, all the stories will speak to you in some way or another. And I don't mean that in like an obnoxious Jenny Mitchell way, but just this is a shared experience of women in leadership. If you are not familiar with Dr. Megan Rabine's research and you're listening to this, go back, check out episode 3.2, which is Megan's presentation and her talk about her story. This research anchors the book, and then we feed into all these different stories. And I love that you said, and I'm going to say it again, Delphine, no one is alone. We are not supposed to be by ourselves as humans. We survive in community with others. So on that note, how did the collaborative aspect of this experience shape your learning, the book, all the things?
Oh, that's been wonderful, right? It's so all kudos to you, right?
Oh
I don't know
gosh.
how you do it, and you created this group of people, and that's not the first time you've been doing it, where you invited me to a group, and and becomes such an amazing experience. But here you took 12 women from, we don't live in the same city, we are not in the same field, and you're like, okay, we're going to do this together. And at first I'm like, oh, we all writing our own story and it's very separate, and that's fine, that would have been an experience. But what you created, it's
Mm,
this community, really. And it was so weird, because so we had a couple of Zoom call, and not everyone could attend because we're all so very busy, and it was really fast, which we have all crazy calendar, difficult to find the time. So we had a couple of Zoom call, and everyone was already tired about Zoom and all that. And then you're like, okay, we're all going to meet in Toronto for a weekend. And I don't know how to describe it, but as soon as we got in the same room together, it's like we were best friends forever. You knew, and there was no judgment, and we all type A. It could have been very difficult. We all are used to make decision and decide, but
mhm.
none of that was there. I don't think there was no ego bigger than the other one.
Yep.
We were all ready to learn from each other and support each other. And that's all we felt. And yeah, it's lonely at the top unless you have a great group of women with you. And we, it doesn't, that's it, right?
Yeah.
It was that collaboration sometimes is a buzzword that everyone uses because it sounds really cool and you need to have it. But that was not it. It was doing it. We were collaborating, we were sharing, we were not, I never felt judged.
Wow.
Um, I felt encouraged. When you were down, someone will pick you up. When you had a high, you will share, and everyone was like, "Oh, that's what I needed to hear." So yes, it's been such an amazing concept. blows my mind. No one else is doing it.
I know. Well, and you need the special ingredients, right? You need, so those of you that are listening, I'm still on the fence whether I will do another one or not. I'll just put that in as a teaser. Start by reading the book. But, I think it's a couple things. One is setting the stage, setting the expectations. Um, I think you do need a curator. Somebody needs to be in charge of curating the room, which I think was my role. And then, that idea that you talked about highs and lows, we do this naturally as women. When your baby is really colicky, you call a friend who has a really tough time, or you call someone who's 2 years down the road that says it's going to be okay. I remember at 4 weeks, I had a baby. At 4 weeks, a wise woman in my world called me and said, Jenny, this too will pass. And I'll never forget that, because when you're in it, it just feels like it's so overwhelming, right? And when you're taking on a new role and it's full on 24/7, and you can barely collect your thoughts, let alone reflect, that idea of having a community around you, and all of the programs I run, Delphine, just as an aside, will have some community aspect to them. Even my one-on-one coaching clients, I'm going to continue having community, because we learn just as much, I think, from others as we do from ourselves. There's a reason that we were meant to be together. Think about women around a big stove or a big pot in the good old days, right? We watched each other's kids. We would oh, try this spice or whatever. And if you put that in a leadership crucible concept, we are hardwired to check out, seek advice, connect. That is not a weakness. That is an incredible strength. And so why do we think we need to do it alone? That's my head scratcher, right?
Yeah, and maybe the why is you have to trust yourself. You have to gain to surround you with trusted advisors. You have to gain the trust of other.
Yeah.
And but it all starts with trusting yourself. And if all this time you're like, oh, you cannot do it,
Yeah.
or it's, I don't know what people are telling us, right? But a lot of times they're not saying, yes,
Yeah.
you can be whoever you want to be and the
Yeah.
leader, and you, and maybe to your point, they don't want to be disappointed. So they're starting, oh, no, you cannot.
Yeah.
We need to
Yeah.
flip it, right? And
Yes.
surround us with, because you can be so much more powerful and successful and reach high highs if you have this group. If you're doing by yourself, you're not going to get there.
No. No.
And it's okay to say, I need help. It's not even I need help, because if you say I need help, it almost
Yeah.
seems like you cannot do it. It's just
Yeah.
say, this is one tool that I need to have. I need to have the help. I need to be surrounded with experts. You cannot know everything by yourself.
Yeah.
And how you work together and collaborate, but actually doing it, not just saying it, that changed everything.
I love it. I love it. Well, Delphine, thank you for collaborating with me on this podcast. Thank you for sharing your insights. And it's a real pleasure to be part of your world. It's a pleasure to have you as one of our authors. If you're listening, I hope you have gone and clicked and bought the book. I really hope that you have a time and space to read it. One of the components of the launch will be these book clubs. We have this vision of the women, of everybody hosting book clubs all the way across North America. And each section of the book has some prompts for you so that you can take that moment in partnership with your peers, or in partnership with your leader colleagues, or with your team, to do some reflection on these questions to help you better understand yourself, to help you better understand your team, but most importantly, to help all of us thrive and be who we were, if I may, always meant to be as leaders. And Delphine's message today is trust yourself first. And I love that, Delphine.
Thank you, Jenny. Thanks for everything.
Thank you, everybody, for listening all the way to the end. That is the finale of another episode of Underdog Leadership Podcast. See you next week.